Sa video na to, ipakita ko sa inyo na ang agawan ng mga makapangyarihang bansa ay hindi lamang sa mga isla, teritoryo, mga scientist, pera o pagkakitaan, kundi pati na rin sa mga mandirigma. Panoorin natin ito.
Now let's turn our focus to Nepal. It's a small Himalayan nation of about 30 million people. It's wedged between two highly populated behemoths, India and China. Nepal is prized for its labor force, among other things, specifically its military manpower. We're talking about the famed Gurkha regiments. From the days of British colonization, the Gurkha people of Nepal and India have made a name for themselves as able warriors. It's honestly a mixture of martial traditions, job opportunities, and a hint of British racist thinking. But that mixture has resulted in a legendary reputation for the famed Gurkha regiments in the Indian Army. And for years now, China has coveted this military connection. This year, China is reportedly keen on recruiting its own Gurkha regiment. And the alarming part is this: it may get the chance to do it, because Nepal's government has stalled India's annual recruitment of Gurkha troops. Why is this happening? Our next report brings you the details.
The landlocked nation of Nepal is at a crossroads. Almost literally, when looking at its geography, it sits high in the Himalayas between India and China. The nation of 30 million is heavily dependent on its neighbors for everything from supplies to employment. Where do the Nepalis seek jobs outside their country? In a variety of fields, but there is one historical employment avenue: the Indian Army. The Indian Army has something called the Gurkha regiments. These were created during the British Raj. The British had a racist trope about martial races that could be used to fill their colonial armies, and the Gurkhas were considered a prominent martial race. Gurkha people from both Nepal and India were recruited. After India became independent in 1947, there was a question about the Gurkha regiments. What would be done with them? Nepal, India and Britain came up with the tripartite agreement. Under it, the UK retained 4 Gurkha regiments, India kept 6, and Nepal's Gurkha people would be readily recruited by the two nations. 7 decades later, Gurkha troops still hold a place of honor in the Indian Army, and deservedly so. Over the course of decades, the Gurkha regiments have proved invaluable. They have served with distinction during all of India's wars. Of course, it isn't a one-way street. The Indian Army recruiting Gurkha soldiers has helped Nepal too. It provides employment for rural areas. Retired soldiers earn a good pension. The Indian Army runs a welfare organization for its former troops as well. Overall, it's a time-tested way to maintain good economic and social ties between the two countries. But this hallowed tradition may be at risk. This year, Nepal might not send Gurkha troops to the Indian Army. The government in Kathmandu has stalled recruitments. The reason they've given is India's Agnipath scheme. It's a new armed forces recruitment scheme brought in by the Indian government last year. Under this, recruits will have a trial period of sorts for 4 years. After that, only a fourth of the troops will be absorbed into the Indian Army. The Indian government brought this scheme to try and curb its armed forces pension bill. But it means there's no guarantee that Nepal's famed Gurkha troops will get a job. This has upset Kathmandu, so Gurkha regiment recruitments have been stopped. But you may wonder, 1 out of 4 recruits is still better than none. Why would Nepal halt the entire process? Well, the answer might be Nepal's northern neighbor. China has been eyeing Gurkha regiments of its own for years, but Beijing's past attempts were always rebuffed. In 2020, Beijing conducted studies to see why Nepal's youth were drawn to the Indian Army. In particular, it wanted to know what the compensation was like. China has been trying to woo Nepal's government as well. It's steadily investing in Nepal and facilitating trade and technology. And now, with the Agnipath spat, China's time may finally have come. The entire scenario may end with Beijing finally getting its own Gurkha troops. And that would be a blow to India-Nepal ties. It would be a great shame for Indian and Nepali Gurkha regiments to one day face off against each other.
Nako, ano kaya mangyari dito? Kukunin ng China, kukuha rin sila ng Gurkha warriors sa recruitment. Alam natin sa kasaysayan, yung mga British ang nag-form ng Gurkha Regiment, no? Yung during the time of British Raj, nung colony pa nila ang as part ng British Empire, ang British East India. At yung regiments na yon ay na-distribute sa India, mayroong napunta sa Nepal, at of course sa Great Britain pagkatapos ng independence ng India noong 1947. At kung susuriin natin mabuti, doon sa dating mga British colonies, ang Singapore at saka Brunei, ay meron pa rin mga Gurkha units. GRU ang tawag doon sa Sultanate of Brunei, Gurkha Reserve Unit. At sa police naman ay yung sa Singapore ay yung mga nasa police force, no? Yung suporta sila sa police force ng Singapore government. At ngayon nakita natin sa pagbabago ng sitwasyon, yung political environment dito sa region ay gusto rin pala ng China na makakuha ng Gurkha Regiment. Tingnan mo itong recruitment process nito at nang magkaroon tayo ng idea, paano pala tinitrain yung mga Gurkha. At magka-idea tayo, sa Pilipinas, meron bang mga tribo na mayroong martial traditions o military traditions bilang mga mandirigma ng ating bayan na masasabi natin na katumbas ng katapangan, kabayanihan ng mga Gurkha? Mamaya, pag-usapan natin. Tingnan natin to, ano yung kanilang recruitment process.
This is Gurkha class of 2019. 400 trainee soldiers, the biggest intake to set foot in the UK in over 30 years. Most are just teenagers, and their journey began thousands of miles from here. Nepal. It's a small nation wedged between India and China, the mighty Himalayas running down its spine. It remains one of the world's poorest and least developed countries, and for 200 years the British Army have recruited some of its strongest young men with the blessing of the Nepalese. Every year 10,000 apply to join, pledging to fight and potentially die for a country and a queen on the other side of the world. It's a friendship like no other, a British Foreign Legion over 200 years old. With the UK's crisis in recruitment, we need them more than ever. But how do you find the very best Gurkhas? How do the British Army protect them from the corruption so rife in Nepal? And once in, is it all they dreamed of?
Gurkha Company!
Nakita niyo? So yun yung kanilang recruitment. Ang Gurkha ay mula sa bansang Nepal. At ang kanilang pangalan, yung Gurkha na yan, ay mula sa isang 8th century warrior na sumikat dahil sa kanyang kabayanihan, katapangan. At yung tradisyon ng mga Gurkha bilang mandirigma ay napatunayan sa kasaysayan nung nag-serve sila lalo na sa British Empire. Makikita natin mga iba sa kanila may award na Victoria Cross dahil sa kanilang ipinakitang kabayanihan. Ngayon, interesado na rin ang bansang China na mag-recruit ng Gurkha na parte sa kanilang armed forces. Ano kaya ang mangyayari noon? Dahil ang China at India ay meron din silang conflict sa border, yung tinatawag na Galwan Valley, yung nasa mga matataas na lugar, yung boundary ng India at saka China, na kung saan ay mayroong daang-daang libo ng mga sundalo na nakadeploy ang bawat panig. Paano na lang kung mag-deploy ng Gurkha Regiment ang China doon sa lugar na yon? Ano ang mangyayari? Maglalabanan ba yung Gurkha versus Gurkha? Aabangan natin. Ngayon sa Pilipinas, kung titingnan natin mabuti, meron din tayong mga tribo na kahalintulad ng Gurkha. Andyan yung ating mga proud Igorot warriors sa Ifugao, no? At dyan sa Cordillera region, makita natin sa ating history na merong mga Highlanders o yung ating mga Igorot brothers ay napakatatapang at nagpakita rin ng katapangan laban sa mga Persang mga panakop simula pa noong pagpasok ng mga Espanyol. Sa Mindanao, andyan ang mga tausog na lumaban for many years. Simula pa nung mag-set foot ang mga Espanyol, lalo na nung gumamit na ng malaking pwersa kasama ang mga converted Indios, ang mga Espanyol noong 1600s hanggang 1800s. So nakita ninyo yung mga tribo na yon kagaya ng Tausug, yung mga Igorot, ay pwede rin siguro pagdating ng araw, gawan din natin ang regiment. Sa Malaysia, mayroon tinatawag na Royal Malay Regiment. Sa Pilipinas kaya, magkaroon kaya ng Igorot Regiment o kaya ay Tausug Regiment. Posible yun, di ba? Kung gagawa rin tayo ng ating similar na mga units na magagamit natin sa pag-defend ng ating bansa. So, ito yung kaganapan na ito sa China, India, Nepal na kung saan ay tinitingnan na rin ang pag-recruit ng mga mandirigma mula dito sa Nepal, yung Gurkha, ay nako, malaking pagbabago na naman sa landscape sa lugar. Makikita natin na ang mga armed forces na ginagamit sa mga conflicts ay mayroong mula sa magkaparehas na tribo. Ang tanong, sila kaya ay maglalabanan? Hindi natin alam yon. Okay, magsilbi itong aral sa atin. Pwede rin tayo magtayo ng ating elite regiment na base sa mga tribal tradition at andyan, hindi magpapahuli dyan. I think ang ating Igorot warriors at mga Tausug warriors ay pwede ring maihanay sa kagaya ng mga Gurkha. Kayo, sa palagay ninyo, pwede rin kaya sila? Ilagay niyo sa comment section.